Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from, live or in the archive. I'm so happy that you're here. My name is Sarah Otto. I'm the founder and director of Confianza. And today we have a very special guest joining us, Noel Foy, also known as Neuro Noel. Hello, Noel.
Hello, Sarah.
So nice of you to join us today. I'm so looking forward to having you share your expertise as a neuroeducational specialist.
Thank you. I'm so thrilled to be here.
Great. And Noel's going to be talking through some really important tips, really useful and practical tips for us, whether we're supporting students at home as parents or aunties or grandparents or guardians or teachers, and also for kids as well, all about how stress impacts learning. It's such an important topic, Noel, now and always, right?
Absolutely.
Great. So if you are interested in reading more about Noel's work, you're going to be able to find her blog on our site. And that's right there for you if you're interested to get a hard copy of what Noel has written. And also on that page, you're going to see her information for her organization where she does direct consulting with folks as well. So let's dive in. This is such an important topic. Stress. You know, stress is something we're all dealing with, I think always, but particularly now. So let's get acquainted with you before you get into your tips and what we should know about how the stress impacts learning. So tell us about yourself, Noel, and your work.
Sure. Well, I am a former classroom teacher and learning specialist who evolved into a neuroeducator. And when one of my sons was diagnosed with post-concussion syndrome, I started attending a lot of brain conferences. And this was just an amazing experience for me. I just had so many aha moments because I learned so much about the impact of stress on the brain and on learning. And it really, I would say, opened up my eyes to a lot of the students that I was teaching at the time, and even to my own sons who loved learning but hated school. So learning about the impact of stress, I felt was so important. And I had been a teacher since I was 21. So I was many decades into this journey and had never really received much instruction or training about the impact of stress on learning in my undergraduate years, in my graduate years, or even in my professional experiences. So I realized this was something that all teachers and parents and students needed to be aware of. And I just felt compelled to provide them with trainings and workshops to help them use this information to their advantage so they could decrease stress and boost learning and boost executive function and metacognition and overall performance. And I'm also an author. I think you're aware that I have written a book called ABC Worry Free. And seeing that I spend a lot of time focusing on the impact of stress, I'm certainly concerned by the spike we're seeing in anxiety. We've seen about a 17% increase in anxiety in children. So this book is a response to that anxiety. The book helps kids see how worry works, and then it provides an actionable strategy to help them manage anxiety in real time.
It's amazing. And like a lot, of specialists working to support schools, it sounds like your need came out of a real personal experience with your son and then has helped, it seems like, so many educators. And we're excited to hear your tips for our audience. And we work closely with schools and organizations that support multilingual learners. And I know in the blog you talked about how stress can come from many different places. And one of the sources that you mentioned, aside from the pandemic of the COVID, coronavirus affecting all of us, as well as, learning a language. And also you mentioned the impact of racial injustice and, sort of any kind of trigger that could be unique to that person. And so you talk about how brain literacy is something that we need. So can you tell us a little bit about what is it that you mean when you say brain literacy? What happens to the brain when we're stressed out?
Well, we know that emotion and learning are interconnected. So when we are in states of fear, frustration, boredom, anger, or lack of relevance to what we're learning, we're in highly stressed states. And when we're in those states, we're not receptive to learning. And it's as if a virtual stop sign goes up in the brain. and blocks learning from entering. And so information that a teacher might be instructing students in, that information might not be going into the brain in those moments of stress. And it's not going to be there for processing or for later retrieval. And when the brain is highly stressed, executive functions go offline. Mm-hmm. So those really key skills that you need to start a task, to stay focused, to follow through with it, to self-monitor how's it going, to self-regulate your emotions when maybe it's getting difficult, and to make flexible shifts in your thinking and problem solve, those are offline when you're highly stressed. And then, if you have kids that are in highly stressed states, let's say they go to actually to fight, flight, or freeze, you're going to see some behavior changes. Mm-hmm. So if kids are in fight mode, they might be combative. They may be saying something nasty. They may throw something. If you have kids in flight, they may be fleeing the room without asking, or they may be asking to go to the nurse or to the bathroom multiple times. Mm-hmm. And those kids in freeze might actually look stuck, have that deer in the headlights look, or they might put their head down on the desk and just play dead. So we're going to see some cognitive inabilities, and we're going to see some behavior changes, which will make it very hard to learn, and it's going to affect their social relationships and ability to socialize in those times too.
Wow. So when we're dealing with students, it's helpful, as you're saying, to look at the root cause might not be what we think it is. So if a student is disengaged or acting out, for example, it may very well be a stress trigger that is not addressed. And sometimes we might be treating the symptom versus the cause. Is that right?
And sometimes the trigger is internal and sometimes it's external. So the trigger could have been something that happened before that student even entered the classroom. Or it could be that student thinks, like I used to think, oh, I'm not very good at math, or I'm not very good at science. So I'm starting to have worried thoughts internally as I enter that classroom. So that could be my trigger. Or it could be something happened, in the hallway. Or, students who are anxious tend to be a little bit self-conscious. So maybe somebody made a look or said something when they said the answer and it wasn't correct. And now that's a trigger for them. So it doesn't really matter so much what the trigger is. I mean, it's important to be aware of it, but the stress response is going to kick in no matter what the trigger is.
So we don't always have influence over even our own stress triggers as adults necessarily, whether they're internal or external, but we do have control over how we respond to the stress and how we teach children to respond to the stress. Is that right?
Yes. And we want the kids to start to pay attention to your triggers and to your thoughts, because the triggers could be internal, and start to develop some strategies. Pay attention to your thoughts, pay attention to how your body feels, because your body's telling you, if you start to pay attention, that you're stressed. You may feel a little tummy ache or rapid heartbeat or sweating, and that those are signs that we want the kids to pay attention to. And there's a lot they can do in these moments to help kind of relax them and reset them so that they be in better states to learn.
I really like your approach because it brings the locus of control to the person, to the student, to the adult, whoever we're talking about, whoever's stressed. The stress response is within us, that we can actually take moves to self-regulate. And I'm thinking from the student perspective, it's really powerful because if students or adults alike, we're able to really pay attention to how we feel physically, that is like tuning in to how we're feeling. And in your blog, you talk about that, the physical symptoms that people might not even notice them. Are they unconscious sometimes? Is it something that you can go through your whole life without realizing, oh, I have a tummy ache when I'm stressed out because of this? Does that happen often, do you see?
I do. And I think that we're becoming better at, let's say, being more aware of mental health, and that this is something that's really important that's connected to learning. So I think that we're bringing more attention to these kinds of symptoms now and doing something about it. When I was growing up, it wasn't something that you really talked about. And so for somebody like me, when I felt that way, when I felt the stomach ache or I felt the racing heartbeat in class, I didn't know what to do. I basically just got used to that feeling. So there are some people who will just say, well, that's normal for me. That's just how I feel. But those are some great signs for you to know, okay, you're getting stressed and your ability to learn and remember and perform is going to be impaired now. So let's do some strategies to help you reset.
It's so helpful. And I'm curious, I know in the blog you talk about 10 tips for what we can do to support that stress response. What would you say are the most important things, especially right now as we're in this time of uncertainty? We don't know if we're going back to school. We don't know how often. We don't know, what modality. We have a lot of health crises and financial crises around us, and the other kinds of racial inequities, and the list goes on. So as a society, what do you think the biggest tips are, the most helpful tips for people at this time, particularly for caregivers working with children? How can we help each other?
Well, I would say we have to be mindful that kids are probably going to come back to school with more variability in their learning. And many kids will likely come back with heightened anxiety. So I think we have to anticipate that. There could be other triggers. Say, for example, you don't have reliable internet, or say the pandemic for you has actually been a traumatic event. Perhaps you might have lost a loved one during this time. So I think we have to expect that there's going to be a lot of triggers, and emotional, psychological safety is going to be paramount. Especially, as I mentioned, we know emotion and learning are connected. So having that psychological safety right out of the gate, developing relationships is going to be really, really important. It doesn't have to take a lot of time. It can start with just a quick 2-minute chat, something that's not behavior or school related. Just a quick 2-minute chat, and over time you start to build a relationship. Certainly having a mental health check-in is a good idea. Having a chart where you have, say, some emojis with a sentence next to it of how you're feeling. Like, I'm feeling really great today. I'm feeling pretty good. I'm feeling okay. I'm starting to struggle today. I really need support today. And having those check-ins, I think, are really powerful for the kids. As you said earlier, Sarah, it helps the kids start to self-monitor and pay attention, because that's our end goal, is to get the kids to really pay attention. So that can be a way to get them to start to self-monitor. And then I think it's helpful for the teachers to kind of know, and the families to know, the caregivers to know, this is how that person's feeling. And we want to validate that feeling, and we can help that person reset and help them move forward so they can hopefully pivot and reframe how they're thinking. So I think that's really important. For online distance learning, I think little things like repeating a person's name twice is going to help them feel a little bit more seen and heard. For example, I could say, well, Sarah, you made a really interesting point. Thank you for that, Sarah. Just quick little things like that don't take a lot of time can be really powerful. So I think that, and then working on executive function is really helpful. I think there will be the need for more visuals. So kids with executive function challenges, they're missing that mental schema in their mind about what the steps looks like and what the finished product looks like. So more visuals would be helpful, at home or in the classroom or on distance learning. Having visuals of the steps, the directions, and pictures of what each step looks like would be really helpful. I think learning needs to be more multisensory, especially now. Keep it fun, throw some fun in the mix, connect things more to what kids are interested in, and some maybe project learning at home, things that, cooking can be a great experience for, math and science, and you could write about it. So I think those are some suggestions. And then probably need to be more mindful about differentiating and scaffolding and breaking tasks down into achievable chunks.
Love it. So many parallels as I'm listening to you about what we say works for English language learners, that many of these strategies can work for all learners, like chunking and chewing and validating identity And what we call language acquisition, the affective filter around executive functioning, is when students are stressed out or the classroom environment is stressful and not psychologically safe, it does block the learning. So many great takeaways for all learners, and really thinking about making students feel valued, making them feel safe in any way that we can through teaching.
Yeah. And it's important to note that when kids are in those highly stressed states, they're not going to be receptive to, the calm down. That is something we often say, but it's not very effective. Or don't worry about it. Another statement that we often hear that's not very effective. In those highly stressed states, they're not going to be receptive to learning a strategy in that moment.
Okay.
Teaching the strategies when they're calm is going to be more, beneficial. And with practice, it's like a firefighter that needs to practice drills when there's no real fire. Mm-hmm. Kids and adults will need to practice these when they're not stressed. And hopefully they'll be there for them when they are stressed, but they take practice.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing as we start to wrap up, Noel, is let's be more proactive, and let's really not make mental health a second thought or a later thought or something separate. Let's bring in, what we often call in schools, the social emotional learning. Let's make sure that it's what we build things around. I know we don't always measure it like we measure content standards, but you're pushing for more attention to that. You're saying, let's do it now. Let's bring in things proactively so that we're not dealing with things reactively and in stress states for all of us, for students and adults alike.
Yeah, for the adults as well. Absolutely. The adults and the teachers, they're dealing with a lot of stress right now. So I think this is a great opportunity in a way to develop coping skills for adults and kids. We know when the stress goes up, the learning goes down. And if we really expect kids to do well academically and socially, I think we really need to prioritize the mental health.
I'm so glad that your message is getting out in the world, Noel, and I'm so glad that you could bring your work to Confianza. It's so near and dear to our mission, is really validating those whose voices aren't always heard and making sure that people do feel psychologically safe. And I've just got a comment, in my work this last semester since COVID hit, I've really made it more of a priority. I think I always do, but I made it more of an explicit priority when I support teachers and all educators online, is doing those check-ins, modeling that. How are you today? Even just a simple poll on Zoom, 5 levels of where you're at, and anonymous, so that people can just say, I'm not doing so great today, and just get that out there. And I know as a coach that when you validate people's feelings, right, especially when we're working with adult learners, you need to do that too. It's not just for kids. When you validate their feelings and give them a space to vent or just share or be seen and heard, it really does make the learning more productive and really just makes it more human.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I so appreciate your work, what you're doing. This is really valuable, especially now. So thank you for bringing attention to this topic. And I have some videos out there people can check out, that they might like to view on their own time. And there's some great breathing techniques and strategies for decreasing the stress, so you can hopefully learn more.
That's really wonderful. And we want to make sure people can follow you on social media. So we've got your tag at NeuroNoel. What a wonderful alliterative name for your work. And again, the book is ABC Worry Free. You can look at Noel's website at ammp.com. And definitely check out the blog that Noel wrote. I know I've read it several times. I'm excited to bring it to several districts and schools that I work with. I think it's a really nice overview and full of practical advice, much of which you've discussed with us today. So, yeah, thank you again for joining us, Noel.
It was great. It was fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Stay well.